So maybe we should talk about the first movement a little bit. So I will pull up here. Uh, this is a recording by Jasmine Choi, a phenomenal flautist. I believe this is a somewhat new recording. I think it came out last year. And here is Fantasia number 4 in B flat major, and I'm just gonna play the opening. So here's Jasmine Choi. And I think we'll stop there because that's plenty of information to talk about.
She plays it very, very differently.
Yes, yes, she does. Every single flautist has their own interpretation, and
Yeah.
every single performer does. So, so, what are you specifically listening for in here?
I'm listening for the relationship between the bass line and the melody line.
Hmm.
And I'm listening for the prominence of harmonic changes.
I see.
So, like, her rendition is really beautiful. I just play it very differently. I play it faster.
Yeah.
Um, and usually what I do is I put a little bit more emphasis on the bass notes. And then I want to make like a really, really big color change when we get into this minor section. But
Hmm.
everybody has a very, very different interpretation of it, and it's really interesting to hear because she just kind of played it like really luxuriously, which
Yes,
is
yes.
something that I didn't really think of when I was studying it. And when I learned these, I deliberately listened to no recordings, which is something that I usually don't do. But since you can get so much out of
Hmm.
this music, and since everybody has a different opinion about how it should be played, I
Yeah.
just wanted to form my own opinion before listening to a ton of recordings so that I would have a foundational idea. Like, this is my artistic vision of the piece.
Hmm.
And then if somebody else plays it in a way that I think is better, then I'm like, oh, cool, I'm going to steal that. But
Yeah.
I also have this idea in my head about how I originally interpreted it. So it's always interesting to hear other flutists play it and interpret it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great point. Because with composers, we use reference pieces as well. We study scores a lot. Orchestration is such a thumbprint.
I'm sure.
So, yeah, yeah. Every single composer does it differently. But if a composer does it really well, then we're definitely looking at the score. How was this specific sound created? So it's very similar in that aspect. When I wrote the piece for this, however, I took a completely different approach because I was listening to all these recordings. I was trying to make sure that I understood how the line worked because a lot of times when you look at music on the page, you get a sense of how things work functionally. Um, but Baroque music, especially, it's great to have that performance so you can hear how those chromatic lines kind
Yeah.
of fit together. And you're absolutely right. I was thinking about that importance of the treble versus the bass line. And that's what we were talking about earlier with Telemann's counterpoint, where
Yeah.
he has these alternating notes and you have to follow each individual line. And so with my approach, I wanted to take a free tonal counterpoint, so I added a lot more chromatic notes in there. So it's going to change the inflection, as you very well know,
Mm.
and it's going to change the emotion. It's still contemplative, but I was very careful to preserve that contrapuntal nature that
Yeah.
he puts in there because
It's
I
definitely there.
noticed immediately, how important it is. It's so stark. All right, so here's my version, and we're going to hear how vastly different it is and how much I am not Telemann when it comes to composing. So, and this is, of course, performed by the absolutely wonderful Anna Fisher Roberts. I'll stop there.
It's so cool.
Well, thank you, thank you. Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I really noticed was the breathiness of the flute. And of course, you're gonna get that with every single piece, but I really wanted to lean in heavily to that, you know? So that's why I started out the piece that way.
It's a neat way to start out, especially because a lot of Telemann's fantasies kind of start out with a bang. So it's
Yeah.
neat to kind of just like sneak into it.
Exactly. And I think that's why the fourth fantasy really spoke to me, was because when I was, listening to all of the different ones, this was the only one that kind of started out a little bit on the slower side. And I could hear each of these notes. He writes in such a way that's quite timeless.
Hmm.
And it feels like even though there's this continuous line, that he really lingers and savors these notes and the moments of arrival.
Hmm.
And I think that's what really kind of stood out to me. And what I love, absolutely love, is that you preserve the quality of the original. And so those leaps, they're quite large leaps for any instrument, except maybe piano. But
Piano.
yeah, yeah, they're quite large leaps, and you both in the original and in this, you can feel the sort of tension that comes with that. That it's almost out of control, but it's handled so delicately and so beautifully that you can feel the confidence of the performer shine through, and I really wanted to take those leaps to an extreme,
Mm.
but
They're fun to play.
oh well, thank you, thank you. Um, but we've worked together in the past, and you know that this opening is one that I tend to gravitate towards. Is this um, sort of softer sound with the percussive, notes on that? But
Is
yeah,
there a
that was
reason
kind
for
of fun.
that?
What's that?
Is there a reason for that?
um, I don't know. That's actually a great question. um, well, it's easy to start out pieces bombastically. And I've actually gotten to the point where now I'm starting out bombastically. But I think it allows you to kind of set up the momentum a little bit as being something slower, and then when you get to the faster sections, they feel starkly different.
Hmm.
Um, I'd have to think about that more. I'm going to be releasing this on YouTube soon, but for the Contemplation et Réflexion piece, I know I started out very slowly purposefully because it says contemplation. So I may have been thinking very similarly that contemplative equals slow, which doesn't always have to be the case, but that does tend to be a code that we have
Sure.
in our music. Um, but is there anything you wanted to kind of discuss about the first movement more? Because that's all I had. I mean, we could talk about it forever, but
We could talk about it forever. Um, I really like the addition of the tongue pizzicati
oh yeah, yeah,
in this movement and in the next one, so we can talk about it there.
that's true.
But I know you mentioned when you originally wrote this piece that you just like took dynamics to the extreme,
Hmm.
which is kind of cool because of course there are no dynamics written in the text for Telemann.
No, no, yeah, and that was very purposefully done. If I remember correctly, we're given minimal dynamics and piano literature at the same time.
Yeah, very minimal. Like it wasn't put in unless it was like, please play it this way.
Yes, exactly,
Um,
exactly. And that was a difference because modern dynamics are we take things to the extreme or a facsimile of the
right.
extreme, and everything's notated. Um, so that was one way. And just looking at the score, and I can put the score up here. Just looking at the score, I wanted to be very sure that when you looked at the score, this is not a Baroque piece. It's very
Right.
modern.
And it
Yeah.
caused me to think differently about it. Like some of my instincts that I had ingrained in myself when I originally learned the fourth fantasy, I had to reverse.
Yeah.
Because some of your ideas about where dynamics should be were different from mine in the original, of course. And it was interesting to kind of rethink some of those relationships, even when the musical material is so different, since it's so closely related to the original. It was neat to explore.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love is you have this. very innate sense of the contrapuntal lines and the or lignée, the main melodic line. But as we mentioned earlier, you have one of the things I really kind of stressed in performance when I was, performing piano lines was that bass line. And that's something that I really worked on here. If you look at measures 20 through 22, I have the tongue pits on the lower register,
I
and then
did
I
notice
flip
that.
it. Yeah, yeah, because I'm thinking about that, but how can we create something that's contrapuntal, but still a different texture?
Right.
Because what I love about tongue pits is you still get that note, but it's so percussive.
And it really is impactful.
Yeah, yeah, and the flute, I mean, any instrument can become its own orchestra. And that's expanding the vocabulary. The flute, there's so much you can create on the flute sound wise, and it doesn't just have to be playing notes.
Right.
And so that's what I really like about that is you realized that line. And I mean, you're very well trained, so it came instinctively and naturally towards your performance. um, so I really appreciated that.
Well, and
um,
I think about it too. I mean, like, I'd love to say it's instinctive, but I spend a lot of time playing lines different ways and singing them and like having them in my head in different ways and deciding, oh, I should play it this way rather than this way, or I prefer this way, or I prefer this one thing out of this way, so I'm going to put that
yeah.
in this other way. Like, I'd love to say it's instinctive, but I spend a lot of time thinking
Well,
about how I want to play stuff. And I'm thinking specifically about this Iberic concerto that I'm learning right now, and I've spent, I don't know, a couple hours on this
yeah.
one very, very difficult transition in the very, very beginning of the piece, where it goes from this really, really like blow up, like crazy 16th notes to this pretty little lyrical line. And I've just been like trying to figure out how to make that transition believable. So some of it's intuitive, but especially in a piece like yours,
Mm.
since you have so many textures to work with, you actually do end up spending quite a lot of time deciding how you want to present those textures.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm glad you bring that up. Yeah. It's you know, you make it sound so effortless, which is, a fantastic fantastic quality. And with composers, people think, oh, we just sit down and write at on the page. And I'm like, this was I was traveling to and from Minnesota at the time I wrote this, so I was like traveling to Wisconsin, then back to Kansas, then to Minnesota, then to Wisconsin, and it was many hours of me in the car just being like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Because how do you infuse the modern with the traditional?
Yeah.
It's not something, I mean, it's done, but it's not something that's commonly done.
Well, and you did such a good job of it because the piece is still there,
Oh, well,
but it's
thank you.
very, very distinctly today.
It is, and but in ways it's still very conservative.
Yeah.
I could have taken it much, much further, and but it was one of those things where I needed to, and sometimes deadlines are an issue. I needed to get this piece to you, and I was trying to decide how far should I take it and how conservative should I make it, and I really thought about the audience here, and that's what you were going for too. Was we were thinking about what's the audience, how are they going to look at it?